everyone. Good afternoon. This is Brett Laforge. Thank you for joining today's webcast. So this is a series of webcasts we're going to do. So each month we're going to provide not just licensing content, but also updates, product updates, industry updates. We encourage feedback from you as a community on what you're seeing in the industry. Helps us to create not only content here, but also helps create new features within our own platform itself. So yeah, quick disclosure before we get started. This session is recorded. All participants are muted. Any Q&A will be handled in our community. So if you go to community.octopus.cloud, you can log in. It's free, and you can post your questions there. The reason why I did that format is because not everybody can join this webcast. And I also want people to be able to review it at a later time. So again, thank you for joining. So today's topic, we're going to talk about audits. It's a great topic, but it's also necessary because audits continue to be performed. They're consistently reviewing audits at Microsoft and other publishers. And so I thought maybe today we could take a step back and kind of go through what an audit is, what you can do to prepare for an audit, how to mitigate against an audit, as well as some features that Octopus can help you if before an audit. Our goal is to help you be proactive instead of reactive. It seems when it comes to audits, it's a very reactionary process. Like you get an audit notification, and then you decide to get your ducks in a row. Where our goal is to help you prepare not just for an audit, but also it provides you business intelligence into what's really happening in your data center. So I think it's really important just to review the process, but also more importantly, a go forward strategy as well. So a quick agenda, some new features from Octopus that's coming out in April. What and why am I getting audited? You know, we get asked that a lot too, like who gets audited? Why am I the chosen one? There's also different types of audits. And we'll go through that. Some are a little more labor intensive than others, and some considerations, right? So what are some things that you should do now to help you prepare? And I'll also go ahead and talk about some big mistakes that service providers make as well. And of course, how to mitigate that. So some new features with Octopus. And again, we're doing these webcasts monthly. And so as we launch new features and product updates, we'll disclose that through this webinar, as well as in the community, as well as in newsletters and other interviews as well. But launching in April, we created a new feature. And basically, this allows you to scan the entire infrastructure that will provide intelligence for end customer reporting and end customer licensing. We get asked a lot about all these different scenarios around flexible virtualization, CSP host, like how can Octopus help me do CSP reporting? And the answer is yes. With this new feature enabled, we can help you to uncover end customer licensing as well as best practices around that, as well as the reporting. So I encourage you to reach out to your sales team who can provide a demo of this, because I think it's a cool new feature. I think it's something that you've asked for a long time, and it's coming out in April. So I encourage you to check that out and reach out to your sales. So why am I getting audited? It's a great question, right? Well, reality is it's part of your agreement with the publisher, in this case, Microsoft, and they have a right to verify compliancy. This is highlighted in the SPLA agreement itself. It's also highlighted in the master agreement that covers all the different Microsoft programs. So I encourage you, when you sign a new SPLA agreement, make sure to also ask your reseller for that master agreement, because that uncovers a lot on audits and compliancy, what they can look for, how far back they can look back for. All that information is disclosed in that master agreement. When I worked for a reseller, a lot of times that would get missed. A service provider would sign or renew a SPLA agreement in 5 minutes and send it back to me. I'm like, okay, well, did you read the master agreement? Because it's super important. And there's also some terms in there that you could highlight in your own contracts with your customers. We get asked, is revenue a deciding factor in audits? Yes and no. Just because you may not report a lot of revenue doesn't mean you can't get a self-audit. We'll go through what a self-audit is later on. But keep in mind when it's a third-party audit like Ernst & Young, Microsoft is hiring that third-party audit firm to perform the audit. So a lot of times, they're paying for that, so they want a good return on their investment. So the higher you report, the more likelihood there's going to be for some sort of audit findings. And what I love is when we help mitigate against an audit and there's zero findings, because then not only did Microsoft waste their time doing the audit, they also wasted a lot of money hiring the audit firm. One thing, mergers and acquisitions. When I worked for a reseller, sometimes, if you acquire another service provider, you will consolidate your usage report with a new organization. And so sometimes reporting gets missed, or there's no longer reporting done on one agreement. And sometimes there's a lot of discrepancies there. And so sometimes Microsoft looks at mergers and acquisitions as well. Why am I getting on it? Reality is it's just part of your agreement itself with the publisher, in this case, Microsoft. There's a couple types of audits too. There's a self-audit. So a self-audit is like a self-review. It's a point-in-time audit. Basically, you volunteer information back to the software vendor. So Microsoft knows what you report on a monthly basis. They're going to know, what your usage is. Sometimes there's a discrepancy with that reporting. Like as an example, if you're licensing 10 Office licensing, but only 7 RDS licensing, they'll want to know why. And so it's more sales driven than licensing driven. They say, okay, well, here's what you report, fill this form out, and you complete it. If there's a discrepancy, you true it up. If there's nothing, you just move on. Now there's the license contract and compliancy team, that's LCC. It's much more in depth. So this is an actual division in Microsoft. It's called the license contract and compliancy team. It's a lot more in depth because they're the ones that are hiring the third party, like Ernst & Young or Price Waterhouse or some of these other firms. So it's much more forensic. And at the end of the day, what they do is they create an effective licensing position report, or an ELP. So basically what they want to uncover is, okay, here's the raw data. Now let's match that to your to what you should have been reporting. And if there's a discrepancy there, that's what you owe. So it's a lot more labor intensive because you're going back a certain period. Usually it's 3 years. And so it's a lot greater detail. So what about end customers, right? With these flexible virtualization CSP hoster and the old license mobility and QMTH programs, which by the way, don't exist anymore. Well, the QMTH doesn't, but how does Microsoft track that? Who's responsible for what? Well, Microsoft wants to ensure you're doing everything to be compliant. Record keeping, evidence is critical. And so if there's no evidence that they own these licenses, the service provider is on the hook. So you need data, right? You need to have some sort of historical footprint inside your data center. And it goes over, again, audits can go over 3 years. I've seen them go back as far as 5. And so obviously if you don't have that data readily available, it makes that process that much more challenging. With Microsoft, you always have to prove the way your licensing is correct. And if you can't prove it, then yes, you are responsible. Now, there are some things, some disclosures that I would argue that do not need to be, communicated. Like, if you look at Microsoft as a competitor, then maybe don't disclose who your actual names are of your end customers. And I don't know if Microsoft really wants that information anyways. What they really want to know is the actual data. Can you justify what you're reporting, right? And that's essentially the critical factor. And again, what that entails is having a historical background. So this is covered again. They say, well, where is this spelled out in the agreement? Well, as part of your indirect agreement that you sign, that your reseller processed for you, I highlighted this. It's page 12, section C, for those that are playing at home. I highlighted including evidence of license for products customer uses to provide software service directly or indirectly, and access to all servers running on the product's customer hosts, sub-licenses, or distributes, or manages on behalf of a third party. So all that information, all those different scenarios is included in an audit. But I think that's where we come in to help you uncover what you need to disclose and what you don't need to disclose, and how you can keep track of this before an audit takes place. I think is super important. Because if you have it readily available, you have the evidence, you know exactly what's being reported, who has access to what. When I mentioned the zero audit findings, that's how that happens. And we actually had a customer not too long ago go through an audit, used Octopus, and found zero audit findings. It was great. So some considerations. Again, are you able to rationalize Active Directory consists of a subset of users? Like, did you enable access to those who did not access is one example, right? So remember, it's always indirect access, always has to be accounted for. And sometimes in a service provider, an engineer will install, let's say, Visio. And Visio is only used by a small subset of users, but unfortunately, he didn't put policies in place, and anybody can access Visio or download Visio if they really wanted to. And so because of that, you would be responsible for all those users that either directly or indirectly used Visio. Do VMs move from one host to the next? Are you licensing for max virtualization? So that's the other thing that comes up. Like, are you restricting VM movement? One thing that I did an interview with an Ernst & Young auditor. It's a video. If you join the community, you can check it out. I think it's on YouTube as well. Like, a company would never have C-level or human resources sensitive documents available for the entire company, right? Like, in your organization, I'm sure you have restrictive access to what your sales reps can download or what they can have access to. And so that you would have security policies in place to restrict that access. Well, the same is true with Microsoft licensing. So again, when you approve the way you're licensing, if you go to an auditor and say, well, we have security policies in place that restricts access, and here you go. Like, an auditor will say, okay, you reported 230 users. Like, how did you get to that number? And if you say, hey, we have a sales order where customers tell us how many licenses they need, unfortunately, that doesn't really provide the evidence that Microsoft is looking for. Microsoft doesn't care if you make money off of it. What they care is, are you accounting for all the licenses that's inside your data center? Yeah, so mitigating against an audit. One thing that I recommend is, if you are chosen for an audit, you're the lucky one. Do not curse or ignore the auditor. You want to keep the conversation very friendly. If you yell at an auditor, which happened in the past when I worked for a reseller, a service provider cursed out the auditor. And when that happens, they say, okay, well, we're sending it directly to our legal team, and they will do the audit. And when that happens, it becomes very black and white conversation. You don't want to keep it black and white, because the rules are the rules. And if you're not licensing correctly, it is what it is. Where if you keep the conversation very sales oriented or very friendly, you're more likely to have a more favorable outcome. The other thing is, work on your timeline, not the auditor's. So when you look at the auditor is there to process the audit, right? Like, obviously, get through it and move on to the next service provider. That does you no good, or it hurts you in a lot of ways, because it forces you to rush through it and not get your ducks in a row first. I always encourage you, if you get an audit, to get your ducks in a row. And of course, if you're using Octopus, then your ducks are in a row already. When it comes to settlements, to no one's surprise, a lot of times Microsoft will settle for an Azure commitment, which may sound appealing because now there's no upfront payout, like you're not, an audit's an unbudgeted expense. So if you owe $1 million, sometimes it's tough to come up with $1 million right away. So you'll settle for $1 million Azure commitment or something similar. Sounds appealing, but it's also, you want to make sure it's going to be more profitable for you in the long run. And so if you don't know what's installed in your own data center, it's very difficult for you to move to somebody else's. And again, just because Microsoft wants you to commit to Azure or whatever, doesn't mean you have to, and I would negotiate that down. Justify why you're reporting on, or the way you're reporting. If you say, hey, my reseller told me this, it's not a good response. What I mean is a lot of times they'll say, hey, you reported 10 Office licenses, but no RDS. Well, my reseller never told me. Well, Microsoft doesn't care. They're saying, well, we have this 5,000 page service provider use rights document that you should be reading and memorizing. That's on you. And we have a contract, signed contract by you that says you will keep track of the licensing. So again, what it comes down to is justification and not just saying, hey, here's what I report. Best practices to do now. I think one way to differentiate yourself is to educate your end customers. Not only shows value, but avoids licensing pitfalls. AWS does a really good job of educating their customer base. They put together a huge licensing form webpage. It goes over videos on how to license products in their data center. They also disclose that, hey, we're responsible for everything under our Microsoft agreement, but you, Mr. Customer, are responsible for everything under yours. And so I like that saying because I think you should replicate what AWS does. They have a SPLA agreement. So I think it's important for you, if you see what AWS does, to maybe replicate that, right? With this whole change with flexible virtualization, hosters don't even, there's a definition called authorized outsourcer. And if you're an authorized outsourcer, you don't even need to have a SPLA agreement. So what that tells me is the entire world is opened up to competition now for you. And so one way to differentiate yourself with other MSPs or other VARs out there is around end customer licensing. And if you could save them money by moving into your data center or make your solution that much more appealing, the better. And again, what we created launching in April is that new module that's going to help you track end customer licensing, which I think is super important. Scan your entire data center. So a lot of times customers will maybe scan using Octopus 10% of their data center. Maybe they're saving on costs by doing that. Great. But are you confident that the other 90% of your data center is 100% licensed accurately? I don't know, I guess you could answer that question for us, but having worked with audits in the past, I can assure you that no one is 100% or even 90% accurate when it comes to licensing. Security policies in place to avoid indirect access is super important. Again, have a record in place, prove the way your licensing is accurate. One saying that I like is ask yourself, if I remove this software from my hosted solution, would it still work the same as it did prior? And if you answer no to that question, you're going to need to license it. So an example of that would be SQL Server with maybe a CRM solution, right? Like CRM is not going to run without some sort of database behind it. Like there's no, you have to pull data from somewhere. And so even though a user is not accessing SQL directly, they are accessing it indirectly. And so you have to account for all those different scenarios. And that's why, a good question to ask yourself, hey, if I remove it, like in this case, SQL Server, would my sales or would my customer sales reps still have access to CRM? Would it still work the same way as it did prior? M&A, I touched on this a little bit earlier. If you think licensing is hard, the company that you're acquiring also thinks licensing is challenging. So before you make the acquisition, I encourage you to actually do your due diligence and maybe run your own audit with that service provider that you're acquiring. Um, I'll provide an example, and I provided this in the past, but if you heard it before, bear with me. But I once helped a customer who had bought an ISV for $5 million. And this ISV, all he cared about was developing the software. Like, he was a very tech-oriented guy. He had no clue about licensing. Well, with that acquisition, Microsoft audited that ISV. And it turns out he owed $2 million worth of Microsoft licensing. So that $5 million acquisition turned into a $7 million acquisition. Sure, there's lawsuits, and that owner had to fork over the $2 million, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, what does that do for morale, right? Like, you bought that ISV for a reason, for the employees. Well, well, if I'm an employee of that ISV and I'm like, geez, this new company that just acquired us is suing my boss that I really liked, what does that do for, what do I think of the new company? So, and again, do your due diligence to make it a lot smoother. Yeah, so I mentioned this earlier at the beginning for those that maybe joined late. And we're going to try to do this every third Thursday, maybe, of every month. We're going to do interviews too, and keep everybody a lot more informed on these webinars. We're going to talk next time on that CSV hoster program, the flexible virtualization. I'm hopefully going to be able to provide a demo of that new module we talked about earlier, that maybe can show this in real time, what this looks like. If you have a topic that you want to discuss, let us know. That's how I build these webinar contents, is based off feedback that we receive from you. Need a feature, let us know on that too. There's a great video as well on YouTube. It's I did with an actual Ernst & Young auditor. You can also see the video on community.octopus.cloud to view it, but we kind of go through an audit, like, hey, what's an audit like for you on your side? Like, I even asked some dumb questions, like, do you ever get cussed out? Like, like, do you love your job? Like, isn't that hard to be an auditor? But he's a very black and white kind of person, and it was a fun interview to do, very friendly and very nice. And I think you'd find it enjoyable. It's about 50 minutes long, so it's a long one, but I think you'll find it very informative to get their side of an audit as well. Again, go to community.octopus.cloud to see. And with that, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being a partner of ours. Thank you for joining. These are fun to me to do. I love putting together content and helping customers solve the complexities of Microsoft licensing. And I hope you find them informative. Again, look for invites from us. We're going to put these out in newsletters, as well as on social media. If you follow us on LinkedIn or some of the other platforms, we'll certainly record these sessions. I'll post this recording in the community once it's downloaded, and yeah, we'll go from there. But everyone, thank you for joining today. I know I ran through that kind of quick, but I like to keep these short anyways. If you have a question, just reach out to the community. That way everybody sees the question, not just the people who are able to attend today. So again, community.octopus.cloud. Thank you guys. Have a great day.